Why don't you begin by introducing yourself, man?
So Jim Roche, Senior Vice President for Cyrus One. What my role really at Cyrus One is I run the entire engineering team, which is built with a lot smarter people than I am.
Yeah, you guys have like rooms with mahogany books, right? Lots of leather and
That's
stuff.
That's right, yes. The pipes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you guys are big deals.
Yeah, I subscribe to, a very similar philosophy I've heard you say, right, is that like surround yourself with smarter people. Like that has been, once I embrace that, and you, so when you're younger, you're always trying to be the best. Like you want to, and maybe that's a little bit of the athlete in me, that like
the competitor.
Yeah, you just want to, like you want to impress people and do that. And when you learn that truly that building a team is the way to go, and surrounding yourself with smarter, better, nicer, even kinder people, a lot of times it makes you a better person, builds a better team, creates a better atmosphere. It's really been quite, I would say in the last 5-6 years of building the team that I have it's been phenomenal to watch.
And it's been phenomenal to watch from the outside because I've known you for years, right? We were at Cyrus for a little bit. I was there for the same time, at least for a year of crossover, it seems like.
Yeah.
And it's, it says, it's funny you use the words, it makes you a better person. It just makes you a really strong leader, right? And us on the outside, they get to watch great leaders develop. We see the strength through the vulnerability of being a good leader. And I say it to others, like Tinoco and I were talking once about electricians. And I said, there's a certain point in time where every tradesman or everybody with a craft is going to focus on being the best. That's the competitiveness in our youth. Like you said, like we wanted to be the best player on the field. Mm-hmm. And then you realize one day that that's untenable and that there's always someone hungry and humble and smarter than you. So you shift from being a subject matter expert or the best in the field at that position. And you're like, I'm going to go become a strong businessman or a strong leader. And that's harder. And that's where you get more vulnerable because you kind of, when you decide to be a businessman or a leader, you start over from scratch. All that experience and talent that you had and the skill or the craft that you had doesn't matter. It just gives you validation, but doesn't mean you're a good leader. It just means that you know a lot, right? So watching you develop and lead, other than Kayla, is there any, you have no weaknesses on your team with the exception of one little person. No, I'm joking. I love Kayla, obviously.
Of course.
But, you have a powerhouse of a team and you've been collecting them. It looks like you've targeted them over the course of time because some of them, it seems like you've been kind of waiting for them to be ready to harvest.
Yeah. And being willing to do that, to wait things out. That has really worked out well. Just focusing on talent. And that's why when people talk about, and this isn't a knock to anything, when people talk about, diversity and equity and inclusion and all that, and I agree that there's places for that in the world, but like talent is the number one thing of a business. And if it just so happens, I think, I said this before, when I hired Kayla, that was a process. Her and I we talked a bunch and basically we came to terms that when it's right for both of us, it's going to be right.
Sure.
I think it would be wildly insulting to her if I said, hey, listen, really wanted to hire you because I needed a female on the team. That absolutely is not. She was the best that I wanted on this team.
Everybody's tried to hire Kayla, right? I think I've tried to hire Kayla multiple times.
Yeah.
Everybody wants a person like that on their team because she's a collaborator and she's a very she's a positive, infectious person, which makes the team better. It's all about, as a leader, creating an environment where you have a higher level of output and productivity. She contributes to that.
Yeah. We used to say that back when, back in the day, when I was at the bank, that I would tell my team, we spend more time together than you will with your own families a lot of times. So we're going to have conflicts and problems.
Real relationships.
Yep. And so I get it. Hammer things out, right? Be respectful of each other, but it's okay to fight and argue. But at the end of the day, we got to come back together as a team and knock these things out. And we would see it. You'd spend 12 hours with someone on a job doing something, and it could be contentious. So
I learned, it's funny you say that. That was a message I radiated throughout Cyrus when I was there, but I think some of the people that said it the loudest were probably like Tesh. Tesh was always like, yeah, you guys are high performance. You guys are going to be out in the race course trading paint, and you'll do that internally sometimes because it's strength through attrition and you drive a more competitive environment, a healthy competitive environment. And if you can trade paint and still do those things, that's how businesses really thrive, you know. And obviously Cyrus has grown. But where did you start from? I mean, where are you originally from? I know you live in Chicago. Is that where you're from?
Yeah, from Chicago.
But you got in the game working for which one?
I was I was a contractor originally. So I come up through the electrical. So
Were you really?
Yeah.
I don't think I knew
electrical contractor's license and came to work with a company and worked for Bear Stearns that was back in the late 90s. Went there.
Who were some of the other players in this game that were with you? Because you guys have, I always call it like the New York Mafia guys that you guys all come from, you know, the bank guys.
Yeah, the core really was Hayden and I started around the same time. Laramie came on. Laramie was similar to me. He was on the low voltage side. I was more on, I managed the low voltage side and the IT thing, but I was more on the high voltage side. Both contract. Well, no, he was a contractor too, and spun over to be a full-time employee. I did the same thing. So it was myself, John, and Laramie. You know, since
was Fava Beans there?
Fava, I didn't run into Fava until I got over to the bank.
Oh, okay.
So when that weekend happened where Bear Stearns went down in 2008-9, I pivoted over to JP Morgan, and that's where I met Vince. Okay. And so we started putting together that what they had as their optimization team, and what a great dude! Just a great mentor and guy to work with. It was a great experience being with Vince.
Another guy that I've tried to hire him a few times, and he was like, "I'm retired," you know. But I'm like, "You're not retired. You're never retired. He's gonna be so bored."
That's right.
But he has the best stories. He had some crazy Army stories.
Yeah, he's lived a full life. And another guy that, you know, and you brought up Tesh's name too, you know, not to go back too far into that,
yeah.
but when we were talking about leaders, like there's qualities in people like that. Vince is the same way. Vince is a leader.
Sure.
Hate him. Like when you look at these guys, they have, and you can't really put your finger on it. How do you drive a person? Like anybody who's played sports throughout their life, you could probably look back and pick one or two coaches that were like, you'd run through a brick wall for, right? But drove the shit out of you. Like would get you to work harder. But when it came time, you were putting it on a line for that person. Something you probably saw a lot in your background. I don't know what makes that quality in a person. I think you're kind of born with it, and it can be developed a little bit, but people like Tesh, that people gravitate toward.
Yeah, he has his own orbit.
Yeah.
Do that.
And it's amazing to watch people like that. So, you know, yeah, so
especially when he was catching his stride. I remember being at Cyrus One when they were still David versus Goliath. Cyrus wasn't what it is. I mean, we all knew Cyrus. I remember when Ferdman was still the skipper, right? And I remember when they were moving their first data center out of Houston into
Carrollton?
Well, no, it wasn't that one.
Was it Louisville?
Louisville.
Yeah.
And I remember being on that project as a contractor or subcontractor early days. I was like at Eaton or something like that. And you had Dennis Shive and Kenneth Wolverton, the good old days. But like the thing is I've seen that company evolve and grow with the industry over the last 20 years. And Cyrus One has had a profound impact on the rest of the industry, really because of all the leaders that came from that company and then radiated throughout the industry. You know, I love Cyrus. I would challenge anybody that I don't know if there's been a business that had a greater impact than digital, though, still, when it comes to the way they've populated the ecosystem of this industry with more people, right?
For sure.
But I remember the days when it was, you know, Gary was the quarterback, Wojo ran business, and Tesh ran revenue, and John ran delivery and execution, and the product shifted. Right around that same time, the product shifted from, you know, what's your electrical permutation, how many nines, and is it distributed redundant or block redundant, and what energins do you use? You know, remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
And now people are like, it's about volume and velocity, and John's like, hold my beer, right? Because you guys somehow all figured out how to move at a different altitude and airspeed from your time together at the banks, I'm guessing.
Yeah, a little bit different there. I think John always had a passion for just like, how can we build a better mousetrap?
Yeah.
And running that sort of that, you know, 737 philosophy of we're just going to build the same thing, repeatable, be able to knock it out, get the OFCI or equipment ready and roll this thing out, right?
Yeah.
And the standardization that we ran through the industry, and that we've seen kind of a pivot from that as of late, because everybody wants their own sort of design.
It was a great time, though.
It was a great time. Yeah. It was, You're exactly right. It was speed to market.
It was the product. And it was, everyone had a chip on their shoulder at Cyrus One because they were David. Not that you guys are Goliath now, but you guys definitely have a target on your back. There's other emerging companies that are like, I want to be as big as Cyrus one day.
Sure.
Right. And it's funny because I used to talk to, remember Jay Forrester was the John Hayden of digital at the time, right? And I've talked to them both, and even Jay, who I have a ton of respect for, would be like, John was good because he kind of picked up where we left off. Digital was the first one through the wall that really standardized and transformed a few things. Cyrus One picked up and left off where they did. And Cyrus really changed the market for a long time for a lot of groups.
Yeah, I think it was... It's so funny when you watch the evolution, right, of exactly what you're talking about, and even to where we are now, and the thought is like, where are we now? Right?
Where are we going to?
And where are we going? Yeah. Right, and that's the answer we're trying to come up with. You and I have talked about it, whether it's nat gas, nuclear, whatever. I think we all know it. Listen, fossil fuels is not the answer. It's got a seat at the table.
It's an application.
It's an application.
Yep.
And we just have to, we're at a interesting point in time in the data center world, probably similar to what it was then, but on a much larger scale.
Well, I think, I've been doing a lot of research on the industrial revolutions, right? We're in the middle of the fifth, or we're at the beginning of the fifth. And I look at statistics like it took 46 years before 25% of the US population adopted electricity, which was the second utility. Can you imagine homes without electricity now, right? It took 46 years before they adopted the vehicle. I could go through this list of how long it took before we adopted phones in the house until we adopted televisions or the World Wide Web to mobile phones to smartphones. There's statistics on all of those things, and it's staggering. The same is going to be said about our industry, right? So what was it that pivoted that tipping point where more than 25% of the US population adopted electricity and boom, before you knew it, everybody did? What was it? Was it pent-up demand? What was the adoption rate being driven by? Was it the consumers plugging things into outlets? So is that what gave birth to TV? Does that make sense? But
yeah, absolutely.
It's all so interconnected. And for us, I look at this and go, I really believe that what we're standing at is an opportunity in which the data center will transform all of humanity. And I'll explain how. I think that you see it because I just saw you look up, but the aggregate, the massive volume of power, right? I just read that latest Goldman Sachs report that came out a few weeks ago. 47 gigawatts is what the grid will need between now and 2030. That's only a few years away, right? 47 gigs of new capacity. And they're saying 27 gigs of that are going to come from natural gas, and the remainder part, it's like a 60-40 split, right? And the reality is even that is untenable and unscalable. That's a bridge of power to get us to something that's more safer, more sustainable, more scalable, and that's nuclear.
That's right.
And I think that once we introduce nuclear as a mainstream vehicle for energy, then like you said, it does this huge thing for what we do to adopt fossil fuels. And we don't have to solve all these problems for storage on renewables. And now we're really counting the ways that we're making an impact on carbon and carbon reduction specifically, right? And I think once we do that, we'll have a greater impact on ESG. The data center demand for emerging technologies, specifically the surge of AI, is drawing so much power that the grid's never going to support it. And now we're going to have to go deliver 50 gigs to the grid, and they're not coming. So that's when you and I were talking. I'm like, is the natural gas the primary and the utilities now the backup? Or, how is it going to work? I expect guys with big fat brains like you and all your team. You have enough.
Me and my team, yeah.
I was like, you have enough horsepower in your team now. I'm sure you guys are probably, all the propeller hats on your team are probably working on this shit right now.
Yeah, we talk about it literally every single day.
So what are you talking about?
So it's interesting, you start with what is achievable, like in near term, because what we're really solving for right now, unfortunately, is extreme near term, because everybody needs
power now.
Yeah. Back in the day, you could call the utility and I need 10 MVA to get something going, and it's not going to draw that 10 MVA for 3-4 years, and it was fine. I call the utility now and say I need 300.
Or a gig.
Yeah, or a gig, and I need scalability. And I can't ramp into that over 3 years. I need that available by 20, well, I'd love it by 25, at least 26, but it's pushing out. So when we start talking about things, bridging gaps, the most obvious would be to start using natural gas.
What are you seeing with natural gas's capabilities or limitations?
So I think the problem you have with natural gas, it's not proven enough. It's proven enough in the generation side of things, right? Because that's where the plants are. A lot of your electricity you're getting from natural gas. So it's not like it's not an unknown.
Yeah,
entity,
we're already
right. We're already
very heavily
right. But putting it on your site and putting it on different sites is another challenge. And it's okay. How's the distribution of natural gas as far as it living up to what you had mentioned before, the nines? Like, how many nines can I get out of it? And do I need diesel then? Do I need diesel backup at all? Do I need what if I'm producing and I'm generating my own? Do I need UPSs?
There you go.
And so you start yanking some of these things out, and it makes sense, right? And then just build your resiliency in your
generation plant.
In your generation plant, yeah. Whether that's in the form of recip or turbines. So what we're seeing is we're trying to fit this stuff together, and we're also trying to use much larger scale items. Like, we lived in a world of making 1.5 megawatt blocks, right? Using a 2.25 megawatt generator. Well, now we're talking about, well, why don't we just bump that up to 15 megawatt gen? And why don't we start moving the needle into a world where, like, as basic as it was when we were looking at 2.25, it fit. It was a certain size engine, readily available, wasn't customizable, met our needs for the 1.5 megawatt block, which was 2 750 UPSs at the time, which are now a 1500. But all that stuff starts ratcheting up. So it worked back then. The 2.25 worked. Well, why can't the 15 work now, right? And put that on a site. Now, you have sites, Cyrus One, if we look across the nation, or even if you look across the globe, and you just start circling places where it makes sense to do it, taking into consideration what utility is, delivery, what natural gas pipelines look like. And then you got to start looking into the neighborhoods that are around there, right? Because we have to be conscious about, we get people complaining about chiller hum in Phoenix.
Yeah.
A little bit different when you got a gen running 24/7.
Yeah, no shit.
And then the NOx emissions, because that's a reality. Like, those NOx emissions are getting killed probably in the next couple of years. You're going to start seeing those things go from like the Northern Virginia 100 to the 50 to the 40 to the 30. Yeah. And I mean, how many gens do you think they're going to let people put in this country? Like,
so that's what I'm saying is, like, that's the question. So at some point, that pressure on renewables is going to force us to have more conversations regarding fission and fusion. And I think that that's a function of time. Do you agree?
I do. I mean, I agree on the fission. I think we got a little ways. Fusion's a little bit tougher to.
Well, just on the fission side, there's so many different types of super reactors, and like there's so many different iterations of what a nuclear reactor is capable of now.
Well, you say now, what's funny about that is, like, how long have they been in submarines?
I would bet you the Navy's had probably 400 to 500 nuclear reactors commissioned, 0 incidents.
Right.
And those ones that are on the type of submarine that I was on, which was a fast attack, you can look at the Book of Janes. I'm sure it'll tell you it's a 20 to 30 megawatt reactor. It probably very vaguely speaks to these things that you can find information on. But that's an SMR, right? And,
100%.
And that would be something that, with the right applications of technology and what the Navy, what Hyman Rickover did, like, I always tell people to really separate your mindset from the dichotomy of nuclear. You have to watch a movie like Nuclear Now that really separates nuclear weapons from nuclear energy, right? And when you understand that one is massively safe for you, right? And it's not a brand new element of technology. Really, we discovered the nuclear weapon in between the second and third industrial revolution during World War II. But we really turned that into an application for energy shortly after the Second World War, when we built the USS Nautilus, which was the first nuclear-powered war machine in the history of the world, right? And that submarine, which I've been on, is in New London, Connecticut, the submarine capital of the world, where I was stationed. But there are a whole fleet, and you don't ever hear stories about nuclear reactors or submarines laying on the bottom of the ocean because the reactor failed. I'm not saying you're not going to have issues, right? There's other countries that have had issues, and we've seen nuclear disasters. But what people don't really understand, and what I always tell them to go look at Nuclear Now for, is It shows you how many people have died every year because of carbon emission. It shows you how many people have died every year harvesting coal, for power. Like all the different things that we use to get the power, nuclear is still the least dangerous form of energy that we've ever created, and people just don't understand that.
Yeah, it's. I always say that if there's a big downside of nuclear, it's its PR department. Right.
I'm in Rickover to beat that. Drank primary or secondary reactor coolant water in front of Congress to prove to them how safe it was to drink it. I'm not saying you should do that, but I mean,
it's just information, and I don't know. I don't know when we lost, pragmatic thinking. Like what happened? We got it, and you see it now in politics. It's the screamers and the yellers, and you could push anything out, and at some point we lost this.
I blame the baby boomers.
Yeah. Well, that would be a good start.
Well, think about it. We grew up and I'm 48, right? So I grew up in a window of time in which my parents were like, hey man, we don't talk about sex. We don't talk about religion. We don't talk about politics. Just be nice and smile at everybody. So it shouldn't be a big surprise now that you have a lot of people our age that are out there throwing their sucker in the dirt all the time because they don't know how to talk about sex or politics or religion. And those are the things that people fight about the most, right? So fortunately for us too, we went from having corporate media to mainstream media. And mainstream media allowed us to open up the aperture a little bit, like corporate media being like the Foxes and NBCs and all those things. But you also have like mainstream media, which are quite frankly a lot of these podcast leaders, because they're putting out as much content with guests that's unfiltered without an objective. Plus, I mean, look, we're doing long version podcasts, so we can unpack a lot of things. So that means people could not only in a 3-minute soundbite on the regular news, they're going to be able to get a touch on something, but they're not going to be able to scratch the pain on it deep enough to understand it or appreciate it. With this, you're not giving people a PhD, but people are going to understand. By the time they're done, they're going to be like, okay, so this is what that dude's all about. This is what he's looking for. Did he know that we have these solutions? Maybe we just got to get in front of him.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And that's why we have these conversations, because you have needs. Your team has needs. It doesn't matter how big of fat brains all you guys have. No matter how strong of a vision your team could design, if you don't get the ecosystem to understand it, no one will be available to bring that vision to life for you.
Right.
So we have to have these conversations.
I do see it. I saw that firsthand really at DCAC, actually, that, after I had talked about it, how many people have reached out since, like immediately thereafter, and then since, just wanting to talk about it, or, hey, well, how does this work? Or why this or why that? And where do you think it's going? And, I don't pretend to be a nuclear expert by any means, right? But just getting more involved and getting feedback from people drives more feedback that I can get from other people, and the conversation just keeps going. And that's what I want to happen, is this stigma that nuclear has. And maybe it's other things too. And, that you brought up nat gas. There's a lot of things that we're doing with nat gas to capture. So we're not worried about CO levels. And so all of that stuff needs to be talked about. Like, the utilities aren't designed to move fast.
Right.
And what we've recently found out in the last 12 months is that, and they're living up to that because they're missing dates like crazy. And I get it. That's just not the world that they're living in. And so use this opportunity to take a good hard look inside and say, where are we going and where do we need to be? Right. And those are opening the kimono for everything. And that's why I said when I talked to you last time is that nuclear is not the be all end all, but it deserves a seat at the table, because you're not doing it with solar and you're not doing it with wind.
Right.
That's not reality. You said it. For the 47 gigawatts, I've seen upwards of 50 that we need. I have customers that are looking for 20 megawatts worth of power, 20 gigawatts worth of power that they're trying to solve for. Like that's one customer.
You know what's interesting too is because the model shifted. There was a time where we would, you as the operator, like power was your problem. The data center was ours, right? We'd go like whether the contractor, the rest of the ecosystem, the only things that we were doing was we had architects and engineers designing data centers. Brokers would find the land for us. Contractors would go aggregate the labor market and get all the trades that were performing the work to figure out how much it costs to deliver in that product, that market. And then they'd work with you because you normally bought your entire VMI or your vendor management inventory program, or your owner furnished contract installed equipment, OFCI, was your problem, right? Now, sometimes We're watching some of the supply chain is the problem of the contractors too. Whoever gets it faster or cheaper wins now. But also what we're really seeing is there was a time in which like, hey, you just build the box and we'll get someone else to make sure we have enough power and we'll let you know when to be engaged on that. And now it's like we have to be talking about power at the same time we're talking about the data centers, which introduces us to a whole nother industry. Like we are on this collision course with oil and gas, right? And,
Sure.
And I've invested pretty heavy into 3 different groups that are specializing in power as a service, right? They're going out, they're ambivalent to what the engines are, whatever the application of size is based on reciprocating or turbines, they'll go figure out if they're going to use, that engine provider or that one, and then they'll package it up and sell it as a service. But I've also learned a lot about that side of the industry, right? Where they're a very transaction-based minded industry. They like that wouldn't work in our space in the way, like, how long have I known you? How long have we all known each other? How long have you worked for your boss? How long have you known, like 10, 20 years, we've all been in this industry, kind of known each other for a long time. So we kind of glide through the industry, knowing each other and knowing that we're going to be working with each other for the next 10 years.
Sure.
So the toes you step on today are connected to the ass you'll kiss tomorrow, and you got to be really careful. It's not unusual. I'm sure you've had people that have worked for you that end up working for Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, 100%. Or Amazon. And that's just the way the industry works. That oil and gas industry, specifically around the natural gas providers, I've noticed that like they see the wild, wild west from the demand that Goldman Sachs report said that we are trending by the end of this year to represent 3% of the total power consumed in the United States, the data center industry. Yeah. And I remember just a few years ago when that argument was only 2%.
It was actually 1% a little over a year ago, right?
Isn't that crazy? They're saying by 2030, it'll represent 8%. 8% of the power demand in the United States will be reflected from one vertical of industry, when that will be data centers by the end of 2030. And we're only 5.5 years away from that. And right now, I'm sure you're talking about projects that are in 2028, 2027, right. Yeah. Right? And we are too. And I'm trying to figure out like, okay, so we know that we're going to need to have power to come to this thing, but there's 2 other large natural gas providers that we're spending a lot of time with, because they all have different block sizes and certain things that they have. But the goal is to try to find one that can work and scale with us for the next 3 to 5 years. Right now, they're just so focused on just one that I'm like, damn, we need to be able to lean in, because we stabilized an industry to standardize on the way that we're going to adopt power, because it's the same reason why like Cyrus actually made a really interesting building block size. And what happened was when you guys shifted that building block size, the UPS manufacturers started shifting their building block sizes. The people that are making breakers and switchboards were switching their sizes, and that became the standard because everything that you guys wanted had to come off the shelf. So the demand of the end user defined the new standard of product, yeah. Right? The demand of the end user being you guys that are going to represent 8% of the power demand. That's going to go back into the way that you redefine the supply chain, but now it's in another industry. Now you're talking to oil and gas people, and the optics and how they view things, they're used to dropping it out on an oil rig in the middle of nowhere somewhere and then plugging it in and being gone. That's not how we kind of engage with our strategic alliance partners. Do you agree?
I agree. I think what you're really speaking to is we have to look at things differently across the board. And right now, if you think about it, you talk to somebody and say you have 200 generators and 202.25 megawatt generators in the state of Texas just sitting idle 99.99% of the time. And then they're having, demand response things and rolling outages. Yeah. So, all right. Well, why are we doing this?
Why aren't we just moving the needle to the left more?
That's right. And I think because everything just pivoted so fast and it's moving so quickly that nobody's stepping back and saying, whoa. All right. Let's think about this holistically, a better way of doing it. And there are companies out there, obviously, when we've talked to them about monetizing the engines. And of course, we're in a world where, well, those aren't really those engines. But do we really want to be running them with those levels? And then you've got the EPA and this stuff. So, okay, agreed. So now let's talk about getting into a different world. That doesn't mean that the conversation doesn't stop. It just says, okay, well, let's solve these problems. And that's where the engineering team really comes in and says, okay, here's the art of the possible. Here's what seems crazy, but it's not that crazy if you think of this long term. We tend to think short term on a lot of this stuff because it's a deal. Hey, Microsoft needs this, Google needs this. It's very reactionary, right? Planning ahead, it does take time. And I know Hayden's always beating on the door saying, like, where are we with this thing? Why is it taking so long to design this thing? And it's like, okay, we're not just plugging in a little bit of stuff. Like, we just got to make sure everything works. And we want this plan to be, good for today.
Scalable, future-proof.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's where the world is going. Well, hopefully that's where we're going, is, to your point, look at this differently. Like, don't be so just sitting waiting for the problem and then try to solve it. Let's think of the problems that are going to come down the road.
I think that you guys are going to have to engage, the more that, I'm not saying the tail wags the dog, but the ecosystem definitely has a lot of leverage over the operators right now. I've sat in meetings where I've listened to equipment manufacturers crown king on which data center operator was going to win a deal because they only had enough UPSs to give a number to one of those three, and whoever got those products was going to be able to win the capacity. Right. And that's unusual, right? So I'd say there's not a balance of power, but it's shifted a little bit to where, the operators still have the purse and the enterprise end users, but the equipment manufacturers allow the wins to happen because they could provide the technology, they could provide the kit, right? We're going to have to spend a lot of time with these power generation groups and get them to slow down to lean into this, because like I'm sitting here talking to customers right now, and it's 400 megawatt sites, and because there's limitations to natural gas, there's is it tier or class? There's like a level 5, category 5, or tier 5 limitation on pollutions, right? So there's only certain things, there's limitations to how much. You can't just go drop a gigawatt of natural gas plant, somewhere. Plus, if you're looking at Enchanted Rock, they have a 0.5 megawatt block. If you want 400 megawatts, it's 800 engines. How are you going to stack those up or lay those down? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to figure out what's the right engine for the right application. And I agree with you. It's going to have to be in places where there's access to natural gas and it's off grid. That's a different type of data center because the latency isn't an issue for that type of data center, different type of customer, different type of density, right?
Yeah. So I agree 100%. It is SMRs.
I think that's all right. Never talking.
It is. Because all those things, like whether it's,
but that's in like 10 years from now. Plus, what happens?
No, come on.
I don't think it takes as long to build them. I think that I think it was Peter Gross was on this, and he said there's 8 companies in the United States that have functional working patents on SMRs already. So it's not an application that the Department of Energy is not, aware of. I think it's optics. And I think that it's really the herd mentality. I think you have people that are armed to the teeth. Cyrus One is one of those groups, your procurement teams led by, the engineers that you have and the construction teams that you and Danny, and like, there's a lot of really intelligent people at that company, right? Yeah. And they know what they need more than anybody else, right? At what point will, like Cumulus had, the Pennsylvania project with the nuclear reactor, and I know that Amazon was the one that scooped that up, but I knew a lot of operators that were looking at that shop, right?
We were, yeah.
Right. And but what would it take? And I think I kind of look at it like everyone is at the pool and they don't know how deep it is or how cold it is, and they're just waiting for the one to jump in. And Amazon may be great for triggering the enterprise end users or the hyperscalers to start making those decisions more prevalent, which will hopefully make the operators more comfortable making those adoptions too, because they know if these guys are doing it, then they can do it too. And who wants to go invest in an SMR? And then you have a client that goes like, I can't go in there because we don't like nuclear, right? And you're like,
sure.
Right. But we have to get this collaboration. But I feel like the collaboration doesn't just exist at that enterprise end user operator level. Even you guys on the operator side are going to have to engage more with the ecosystem and really get these people that engage on the power side. They're going to have to lean in and understand the models in the long term and how we scale, because they're not, then you're not going to have any consistency. And if you can't get consistency out of that part of the supply chain, then you're not going to be able to stabilize as you grow.
Not at all. And to be able to sell it seems like it should be easy. If you're
it should be super easy.
Yeah. If you're a tree hugger, and I've used that term, actually I used that term at DCAC. And
I am a tree hugger. Yeah.
Yeah. But people took it as a pejorative, and I don't.
It's a good thing.
Yeah. I think
we're all tree huggers.
You should be, right? Yeah. And so we get it. And you can't not believe in nuclear. If you're that it doesn't work.
If they see what we're scaling to, I mean, even John said it at your guys' sales kickoff last year. He's like, look, I think his estimation was cloud was 10x the demand of IoT and AI will be 10x the demand of cloud. But now you have guys like Michael Dell, they're like, it's 100x what cloud demand was. And that could probably be more accurate.
Yeah. But don't you think it's going to follow exactly what you kind of kicked it off with electricity in the homes? It's going to be somewhat like that. Once you start landing these, and then it's just like,
well, what's the alternative? We consumers going, you know what? Let's just not use technology. We'll just use technology 2 days a week instead of 7, and let's figure out how to live within our means.
Right.
Well, that's not how this nation works. That's not how any of it works.
Well, you have all of these things coming together too, because even when you talk about people wanting electric vehicles, all right, well those need to plug into something, right?
EV's a factor.
Yeah, and so, like I said, it kind of
those electric vehicles that are plugging into dirty coal to get charged.
Right. Yeah. They don't run on smiles. Yeah. So I think, all roads lead back to having, real pragmatic conversations about how this happens. How do we get to this place? And we can't get to it because people are going to stand in line with signs saying, not in my backyard, because they're not armed with the information.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if we could get to a point, that's why,
What's the point? Is it business or is it politicians?
Geez, you know how this world works, right? It's George Clooney coming out and talking about it. It's Oprah embracing it. And sincerely, that, like, having the right people speak about it. I mean, if you saw when nuclear pivoted, there was a push by a lot of the environmentalists back in the day for nuclear.
Yeah, Sierra Club, Greenpeace, they were all
exactly
for
right. Sierra Club's a great example.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, something happened.
Jane Fonda got involved.
Jane Fonda and the oil industry got involved. And then all of a sudden it pivoted.
It's Hollywood. Yeah. There was the movie China Syndrome or whatever that movie was that had the nuclear meltdown, and it happened to happen right around the same time with 3 Mile Island. And you had Chernobyl in the middle of the Cold War, which no one had. It just wasn't enough knowns,
And there were different applications back then. To think that we're running the same sort of nuclear world that we were running back then is like saying, well, yeah, you remember when the Model T was a problem?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Why are we having that conversation?
Yeah, right. And so I think it's education, and I don't know. It's some people. I like to think that if you keep giving the information properly, that it will be absorbed by people.
I saw a statement or a quote from the chairman of JP Morgan Chase who said, the data center technology evolutions that are taking place and the adoption of AI will one day lead to a different type of power, which will lead to you'll have more power to support more technology, which will lead to more advanced sciences, which will reduce more cancers and probably streamline a lot of the things that we do to where even, we end up having 4-day work weeks one day because technology, the power that we need to support the technology that we have that improves the lives of everyone around the world is the only solution right now. That's the number one focus. It just happens that data centers for us, like most people don't even know what a data center is. They know what the cloud is or they've heard of AI, but they don't realize that that's just the tip of the iceberg over the waterline. If you look below that, which is where a majority of all the real iceberg is, that's the data center.
Right.
That's the engine for it all. And it speaks both sides, right? It speaks all sides, including the Internet of Things. So I think there will be I can't imagine what the world was like at year 46 when 25% of the population said, finally, we're all going to flip on our light switches and we're all going to put electricity in every home. But I think that there'll be a tipping point like that data centers will trigger into power, and then it'll force us to use a different form of energy. And it could be, like you said, someone embracing it, but I don't know if it'll be a celebrity. I think it has to be a celebrity, but I think it has to be a luminary of industry type of celebrity, like an Elon Musk, who has his hands in satellite. He has his Neuralinks. He has his hands in SpaceX. He's got his hands in Tesla. I mean, a lot of the cars, the EV market. I mean, talk about a man that transformed an entire industry. I don't know of a single automobile manufacturer that doesn't try to do or repeat some version of what he created.
Yeah. Well, he's a big believer in nuke. Because he knows.
But I think that it hasn't been a priority for him yet. But now maybe if we could get a guy like that to put his weight behind what it is that we're doing, what we're talking about, imagine how big of a confidence shift it puts into that industry, because whatever he gets himself into, he eventually changes for the better for the consumer, right? That's why we like him, is because whatever he does, it's disruptive. It transforms and it forces businesses to change the way they do things, which ends up having a really healthy and positive ripple effect on us, the consumers, as it makes things maybe more affordable.
Yeah, that too goes back to leadership, right? Because he will surround himself with the right people to get the job done. And you're right. People like that, we need people like that driving this thing. And it's not the be all end all, but it is if you want to get to this finish line. And it's funny. I have one of our ESG guys that tells me, well, what are we doing? Like, Microsoft's going to be off gens in 2030. They're not going to do gens. I said, I can get them off gens tomorrow. Like, I just won't put them in. Is that the answer?
Yeah.
Because I've got the answer.
Will they sign that contract?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it always comes down to. Like, when we talk about these things, is that everybody's a tree hugger and an environmentalist, and everybody loves, I think we all kind of work that way. And then when you slide that contract over and it costs you X amount of dollars more for me to put in X, Y, Z of an infrastructure or process, then it's like, oh, yeah, I know, but I can get it over here and it's going to save me literally $100 million. I mean, that's where kind of the rubber meets the road. So, when I hear people say that they're getting away from gens, and there are some of the hyperscalers that we are working active projects, no gens on over 100 megawatts.
So they don't require a 2 SLA? Okay, perfect. So they're just building the reliability of their network topology. That's sounds like. Okay.
Which is what we've always been banging the table about, is like back when I was running IT, my thing was, well, I've got 2N infrastructure. Like, as long as I can fail it over and not even within the same building, right? Then isn't that what my infrastructure is supposed to be able to do? So why do I need 2N coming in? And why do I need gens? And why do I get UPSs? I get that.
So it's like almost an arc, right? I remember when we were talking to people about putting in UPSs, and they're like, why the hell would I need a UPS? And now you remember going back to them like 3 years later, like, hey, listen, we have to put a second one in. They're like, what in the hell would I need a second one for? Remember those days?
Yeah.
And now you're like, hey, man, we don't need those after all. We're going to rip that shit out. I mean, I love to see what's going on. I think the biggest changes are probably the mechanical permutation, but
100%.
But I do think the way that we send the electrons down the line are going to change, or I think the reliability of it will shift into more of a different application, like the network or something. But the soup's not done cooking in this industry.
Oh man, no.
Every data center, I'm sure every data center you're still making, as much as you try to standardize them, they're all probably just a little adaptation off of the other, right?
Yeah, just ask Danny Kauser.
Yeah.
The days are gone when we used to say, hey, Danny, we need this in the next amount of weeks. And it was like, okay, it was how we started the conversation. It was cookie cutter, and this is what we do, right? And well, now it's a 5-4, a 7-6. Oh, these guys will do a 12-11, and these guys will do no gens, but half gens, and
so crazy too. Everything's almost it's Goldilocks. Everything's too hot, too cold right now before we arrive to some iteration of standardization where it's just right, and we haven't got to that yet. But Cyrus is an incubator for that, because the volume of velocity that you guys are doing organically.
Yeah, and I wonder if back to a comment that you made, I wonder if it is a little bit of the tail wagging the dog, because I know if I have a 48 megawatt building with no gens and UPS, and I have the utility there, it'll sell.
It'll sell for sure.
It'll sell.
They'll compromise. They'll be like, we'll figure out a way to work around this.
That's right. But when I open the kimono, or I say, hey, listen,
you can have all the card,
right? You do it your way, and then next thing you know, I'm putting all this crap in, and it's like, oh man, I bet you if we just did it, it would work.
But there's people that are going to always there has to be groups. The beauty about Cyrus is they were disruptive as hell. They changed the market, and then they defined a new standard for the market. It's not your job. It's so did digital once, right? And then I'm not saying digital sat in a defensive posture for the rest of their careers as a real estate company, but they certainly didn't have as much of an impact on the way that the industry was delivering product, means and methods specifically, let alone design, as Cyrus did. But then even Cyrus, and you get to a massive scale, it takes a lot more work to have that big of return still on change because you're iterating off such a massive volume of space power and cooling. But there needs to be more Cyruses that are emerging, whether, I'm not going to start name dropping companies right now.
Sure.
But I know of companies that they one day want to be the next Cyrus or the next digital, and they all start from somewhere. And those companies will then change or be disruptive and change what the product is and what they're delivering. And that means maybe us, less of these or more of that. And, it just takes the right end user to sign the right contract to make everyone do it. And then it's the swimming pool effect again. Then, Malcolm Gladwell has a whole book on it. He's like, once you see one or two jump in and everyone survives, then they all jump in. And then you're going to have a full, you just went from a zoo mentality to the jungle, right? So, and that's where we're heading to. But I love that part about this industry because it feels like we solve for something big in this industry, but then there's another whack-a-mole hole that pops up. And we're like, all right, guys, now we need to go fix the mechanical design. Let's figure out what we're going to do as an industry, standardize there.
Right.
And then we get in the electrical, oh shit, we're not building these things right. Maybe we got to go into different markets, better greenfields, you know what I'm saying? And then there's always an uptick of some sort of offshoot of some things are vogue. They don't last very long. They're just very... like everything will be built in a modular fashion. We'll only be building Lego data centers. I heard that 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, and then I think I heard it last year that we're 10 years out again still. And we're like, we'll see. Right. But there's always going to be shit that you hear about and those applications are great, but there will be something that's big that splashes soon that'll have a huge change in this industry. I think it's going to have something to do with the power and the energy side.
It's gotta be, right?